Okay, so today what we're doing, guys, is we are going to be looking at the next topic in chapter 1, which is called prerequisites for health. Now, can anyone just in the chat box maybe, can you guys tell me what is a prerequisite in a simple term, if you know what it means? What is a prerequisite? You might have heard of this word before. When you think of the word prerequisite, what word comes into your mind, or what terms come into your mind? What do you think it means? Okay, well, basically prerequisite, refers to some kind of a requirement, some kind of a condition that needs to be met, or some kind of a condition that needs to be fulfilled. So when we're talking about prerequisites for health, what we're really talking about is some kind of condition or factor or requirement that needs to be met or needs to be fulfilled in order for us to achieve a state of health. That's the basic idea. Okay, so the World Health Organization have basically identified a few different prerequisites for health that no matter where you live in the world, these are basic requirements that you need to meet or you need to fulfill in order to be able to achieve positive health outcomes or positive health gains. Okay, we can use, you can see they're all kind of shown on this slide here. And there are basically 8 of them so that we need to know. Okay, and we've got a memory tip that you can use to remember them. Pies feed 7 slithering snakes. So the P in pies stands for peace, the I stands for income, E stands for education, S stands for shelter, and then the first letter of each of the remaining memory tips stands for the prerequisite. So F for food, S for social justice and equity, and yeah, you kind of get the point. So what we're going to do today is we're not covering all of it in one go. We're just going to cover half of the prerequisites today, and then we'll cover the other half in our next lesson. Okay, because this is quite a big topic. So when we're looking at our first prerequisite for health, we're talking about this concept of peace. Now, obviously in Australia, we are pretty much blessed to not really have to deal with a lot of conflict firsthand. For example, when we leave our house in the morning, we don't have to deal with conflict happening outside. There's no war zones. There's no like civil conflict where people are physically fighting with one another. We don't see tanks outside of our houses or, army personnel outside of our houses. So we basically live in a society that is pretty much peaceful. Now, the absence of peace is conflict. And a lot of people around the world live in environments that are filled with conflict, okay? And we have to remember that being around an environment where there's a lot of conflict or where there's a lot of violence or a lot of wars can lead to physical injury. For example, you get caught in the crossfire, or you get wounded just trying to go from home, go from school back to home. But it can also have a big effects in terms of your mental health. Okay, you're always, for example, stressed. You're always anxious. Okay, you don't know if you're going to make it to the end of the week alive. So there's a lot of other health outcomes that can come out of living in an environment that doesn't have where you don't have a lot of peace. Okay. Another thing we need to remember, and why peace is a really important prerequisite for health, is that we can only have functioning schools, functioning hospitals, functioning medical centers. We can only have these functioning organizations and facilities if we have a state of peace. Okay. If you've got conflict happening all around, buildings get destroyed, hospitals get destroyed, schools get destroyed. Okay. And you would know the story of Malala, that, she was trying to defend her school, and she was trying to defend her classroom from the Taliban when they attacked. Because these are the first, whenever you have conflict, particularly in developing countries, the first organizations or the first places that get destroyed are schools, hospitals, medical centers, all of these things that are so important for maintaining health and well-being. So it's really important to have peace so that we can have uninterrupted access. Uninterrupted access means that we can continue to enjoy these facilities and benefit from these facilities without having to have our classrooms destroyed, without having to have our hospital facilities destroyed. Okay. And as a result of that, obviously, we can live with less anxiety and less stress as well. Okay, so that's why it's important for us to have peace. That's why peace is a prerequisite for health and well-being. Okay, the next thing that we're going to look at is I. So P for peace, I for income. Okay, income is basically a prerequisite for health, very similar to what we learned about in Unit 2. Does anyone remember the important, we learned about an important factor. It's not just about income. It encapsulates other things as well, like education and employment. Can anyone remember what the key term for that was? I'll give you a clue. It starts with the letter S. It is related to income, and it's also related to employment and education as well. Yeah, socioeconomic status, good. So socioeconomic status is basically kind of like a bigger, broader concept, and income kind of falls under that. Okay, just important for you guys to know how the two are related. In other words, if you've got a pretty good or moderate to high socioeconomic status or moderate to high income, what that basically means is that you can afford to buy medications. You can afford to sign up for gym memberships or things that will improve your physical health and well-being. You can afford to be able to, rent or buy a house that is sufficient for your needs. For example, if you've got a family of 6 people, but your income only allows you to be able to afford maybe a small apartment that can only fit maybe maximum 2 people, then it's not going to be enough. Okay, people are going to feel more stressed living in such a small house. The chances of infection spread are quicker in cramped areas, for example, where there's a lot of overcrowding. So all of these other issues can come about. All of this is because of income. Okay, and there's this famous saying that money doesn't buy you happiness, but actually money can help you to achieve certain things that may influence your happiness. Okay, it doesn't mean that, oh yeah, I have money, I can buy a sports car and there my life is settled, my health and well-being is guaranteed, but it's more so that you can achieve those basic needs, and you don't need to be stressing about everything in your life from A to Z, because most of those things are already fixed just because you've got a moderate to high income there. Okay. Also, we need to remember that even though in Australia, Medicare allows us to have kind of accessible and affordable healthcare, and we don't have to, for example, pay out of pocket for every single doctor's appointment, things like medications, like your antibiotics, hay fever medication, asthma inhalers, all of those things are not covered by Medicare. So you need to have a proper income to be able to afford that. And those things are not cheap as well. So that's another thing that you need to consider. Okay. Another really important factor to consider is the gross national income of the country that you live in. So it's not just your personal income or how much money you've got in your bank. It's also about the national income of the country, or the GDP of the country in which you live. For example, us living in Australia means that our government gets a lot of revenue from our taxes that we pay, from other things that we pay for. Okay, and basically our government is able to fund or put more money and invest more in health resources and health facilities. Okay, you'll never, even if you go to the worst hospital in Victoria, it would still have the basic facilities. It's not going to be run down. It's not going to be lack of staff there. It'll still have the basic facilities to tend to the people that come there. Okay, and the reason for that is because the government invests or funds those facilities because of the high kind of economy, or the very kind of, how would you say, increased funding that they have access to be able to put into these resources there. In some countries, like especially countries that are war-torn, governments in those countries have money, but they often put the money towards things like buying weapons, okay? Because that's what their priority is, that we've got to fight the wars, we've got to buy more weapons, and they don't really care about rebuilding the hospitals. And that's why the citizens in those countries tend to suffer, okay? So it's really, really important for us to remember that. And some other examples of things, if you want to go swimming lessons, obviously that's going to cost money. Things like you want to go improve your mental health, speaking to a psychologist, that's going to cost money. All of these things are basically things that do cost money, that will take some chunk of your income there. So if you've already got a moderate to stable income and you're kind of comfortable there, it will be good for you in the long run in terms of your health and well-being. You can also see in this graph here, you can see that when the household income is less than 15,000, which is really, really low, you can see that the number of people who say that they've either got fair, which is okay, or poor health status, which is low, are higher. So more people will say that their health status is poor or just okay when the income is low. But you can see as the income gets higher, so we're talking 50,000 or more household income, there's less people that say that, oh, my health status is poor or my health status is fair. So these people are more likely to say, no, I'm actually happy with my health status, or my health status is maybe good, compared to these people who give a different kind of self-assessed health status rating there. Okay, so that's what the graph is showing you there. So that's why income is really, really important for our health and well-being. Okay, even though we don't realize it, money does play a really big role in all the dimensions of health and well-being that we can think of. The next one is education. So we've talked about education as well, and it is one of our aspects of socioeconomic status that we went through before. Okay, along with income and employment. Your education is important because when you have a basic education, you're more likely to have better health literacy. Now, can anyone remember from Unit 1 and 2, or just give me a quick definition, what is health literacy about? Just break that down, maybe just a really brief definition or indication of what is health literacy. Anyone remember? You can take a guess. Or if you remember an example of what a person with good health literacy might have knowledge of. What would we say? Okay. So if we remember, guys, health literacy is about your basic health knowledge. It's kind of like, you know, when we say we have general knowledge of something, health literacy is your general health knowledge that you have. Now, obviously, you guys being HHD students, you will have more health literacy already compared to someone who doesn't do health and human, because you've already studied all these different topics, okay? But we also need to remember that just as a result of you going through high school, just as a result of you going through normal schooling from prep to year 12, you already have better health literacy than, let's say, a student who's in a third world country who's never attended school. One of the reasons for this is that from prep to year 12, you don't even need to do health and human. You already do health and PE in your lower year levels, right? In year 7, year 8. In home economics or food technology, you study about the importance of things like using separate cutting boards for cutting meat versus cutting vegetables to prevent food poisoning. Okay, you learn about things like how important it is to wash your hands after going to the toilet. Okay, all of these things you learn about either in primary school or in secondary school in some way or the other. And these help to build up your health literacy. You only gain this knowledge through your health and PE classes or other classes because you go to school. You have the opportunity to go to school. Okay, not all children around the world have the opportunity to go to school. And so those children who don't go to school don't get that health literacy, and they don't get the opportunity to make those better health choices. For example, in many parts of the world, women who are not educated, who then go on to have children, continue to mix their children's baby formula, which is kind of that milk powder, into like dirty water or contaminated water, and then feed that to the child, not understanding that by mixing the milk powder or the baby formula into the dirty water, that child is going to be very likely to die early, or is going to be very likely to get a waterborne illness that could, take them out for months. Okay, so it's really, really important to understand that connection between education and health literacy. Okay. Also, the more obvious one that all of us are pretty familiar with is if you've got a good education, or you've got a degree, or you've got a diploma or some kind of formal qualification there, you will be able to get a better job. Okay, that's just general knowledge. We all know this, that we always have higher rates of employment or people being able to get jobs and secure jobs if they've got sufficient qualifications. This doesn't mean that everyone needs to get a PhD or a master's degree. What it just means is that you need to have some kind of formal education. Okay, and that will allow you to have a better education, which will then allow you to have a better job, and that will allow you to have a better income. So you can see those three concepts of socioeconomic status are interrelated in that sense. Okay, and we already know, we've looked at this in income as well, that if you've got a better education, you're able to get a better job, and you are then able to have a proper income, which then allows you to do all of those things that you would be able to do because of that income, because of that stability, financial stability that you have, compared to someone who's like living day to day or living paycheck to paycheck. So that's what education is important, or that's why education is a requirement or a prerequisite for health and well-being. And the last one that we're looking at, before we look at the last one, there's just, this is just a little bit of data taken from America. So it was hard to find Australian data for this one, but you can see that this basically shows you two groups of people. So the yellow one is showing you adults that are age 25 and above with a college degree, so with a university degree. And the orange bars are showing you adults who are age 25 and above who have no high school diploma or GED. So that's basically talking about basically people aged above 25 and above who have no like VCE certificate or no high school certificate. So they've basically dropped out of school halfway through. Okay, so they've got no university degree as well. So I want you guys to look at this graph now. I know it's a bit blurry, but based on what you can see, can you guys identify a trend in this graph? And when you can identify it, just put your answer in the chat box and then we'll discuss this. Any trend? And I know we always struggle with the trend questions, even though they're supposed to be the easier ones compared to the comparison questions. So what I'm expecting, guys, is you've got to mention the year here. Just give me a general trend that you can see across the data set. Something like a consistent pattern or a consistent observation that you can see. Yep, in every risk factor, adults age 25 and above are more at risk. Yep, that's correct. So adults age 25 with no high school diploma or GED. Yeah, so all of the orange bars you can see, there's a higher risk factor when you are uneducated. That's a good trend. You could even mention the other side of the coin. You could say that in terms of every risk factor or disease factor, people who have a college degree or university degree have lower risk of those diseases or conditions compared to people who do not have a university degree. Yeah, so that's a good answer. So I'll just write down, I'll just kind of type up just a sample response just to show you guys what that might look like. So again, just starting with the year. So in 2011, it can be seen that adults age 25 plus with no high school diploma or GED have consistently higher rates of risk for all diseases shown compared to adults who have college degrees. Okay, so that would be like kind of like a sample answer, I guess, for a trend. Okay, you can see here that you get 1 mark for mentioning the year, and then you'll get another mark for mentioning some kind of the specific pattern that you see. So in this case, we've mentioned that the people that are age 25 plus with no college degree or no high school diploma, that is the orange colored bars, the dark orange colored bars, have consistently higher rates of risk for all diseases shown. And we can see that in the graph as well, that in each of those diseases, the orange bars are always beating the yellow ones, or they're always kind of going above the yellow ones. Okay, because this is a trend, we want to make sure we don't talk about just one part of the graph or one specific part of the graph. So just be careful when we're talking about trends. We try to make sure that we only talk about like, we try to make sure it's a general overall pattern that we can see. So I would try to avoid only talking about diabetes or only talking about high blood pressure or only talking about obesity. Okay, so just try to avoid just zeroing in on just one of them, because when we talk about trends, trends are always more general, they're more broad. Okay, it's in a way good that most of you are actually a lot better at doing the harder comparison type questions for data analysis, because those are worth more marks, but still we don't want to lose 1 or 2 marks on an easy trend question. So we just need to get into the hang of doing the trend questions as well. We'll do more of these anyway once we get back to school. But yeah, that's basically what the difference between a trend and a comparison is. Trends are always more general and more broad, just an overall pattern that you can see, whereas the comparisons are more specific. You notice here as well, guys, that we didn't include any of the percentages from the graph because we don't have to. When we talk about trend questions, we only mention or state the trend. We don't need to incorporate that numerical data as well. Okay. Good work. So that is basically just looking at one piece of data there. Okay, the last thing that we're going through for today is shelter. Now, when we talk about shelter, we're talking about basically housing, okay? But the name of the factor is shelter, but we're basically talking about any form of housing or any form of dwelling that you live in or that you reside in, okay? We don't necessarily only isolate shelter to the word of housing, for example, because we know that certain people may live in a hut. Certain people may live in a place that's not necessarily a house, that doesn't necessarily look like a house, but it's still home for them. For example, you know, there's people who have like a huge RV or caravan attached to their car, and that's their house, and they move around the country in that. So that's still a shelter for them because it keeps them safe, keeps them protected from the harsh climatic conditions, keeps them protected from predators and all that stuff. So necessarily we can say shelter is housing, but it's not necessarily always the typical house that you might picture in your head. Okay, it's important to remember that. Shelter is a prerequisite. It's a requirement for health, mainly because if you've got a proper house or a dwelling or some place where you can stay, where you've got a roof over your head and where you're protected, that means that you're going to have more stability. You're going to have more security. Okay. Imagine someone who doesn't have a house, who's sleeping on a park bench. Imagine how easy it is for them to get attacked at nighttime. Imagine how easy it is for someone to, take their belongings, or how easy it is for them to get sick. Okay, if it starts pouring or hailing down, they don't have anything to protect them. They're very likely to catch a cold, very likely to catch pneumonia, okay, because they don't have a warm place to live. It's really important to remember that the minute you lose shelter or you don't have shelter, like the guy in this picture here, you are you're at very high risk of being pushed into homelessness. And we know what kind of issues can come out of being homeless as well. And obviously after that, most people who are homeless also fall into poverty, which again brings its own health issues along with it. So it's really important to remember that it's not just about being protected from rain or from heat or from the elements or from predators, but it's also about being able to live in an environment that is sanitary. Okay. And we know this more than ever living in the COVID world. COVID's not over yet, so I can't even say post-COVID, but it's really important to remember that when we're talking about a consistent shelter, we're talking about a place where you can come home and you know that place is clean. For example, when we go to a public place and we use a public toilet, we always feel a bit like irky about it because we're like, we don't know who's been in it before, we don't know how clean it is, blah, blah, blah. But people who don't have a home, they're always using these public facilities. They don't know if those public facilities are sanitary. They don't know if they're going to get sick as a result of using them. But that's the only choice they have. So imagine this, that with you living in a proper shelter, you having a proper home and a proper house to live in, you're able to protect yourself from dangerous germs, from bacteria and from infections, okay? And because of this, you are much less likely to get sick, or your incidence rates of illness will be much lower compared to someone who is homeless, who doesn't have a stable home to live in. Okay, this is a really good quote as well that we'll just, I'll quickly read to you guys. So it says, I want to live in a world where we view access to housing, basic needs, privacy and dignity as human rights rather than privileges. This is really important to remember, that having your own house or having a home to live in shouldn't be seen as a privilege, and it should be seen more as a basic need. Just like the air you breathe or the water you drink, housing is just as important, because shelter is very, very essential to survival. Okay, even though we might not think this, even though we might think, oh yeah, I can manage sleeping on a bench for a few days, what's the big deal? It's something that's like easy to say, but when you're actually put in that situation, it's actually very difficult to do. And it does take a toll on all the dimensions of health and well-being. And I think there was a video, which I think I will find and maybe we'll watch when we get back to school next year, about a guy who was interviewed, like a homeless guy. And he was basically indicating all the different ways that his health and well-being, his sense of dignity, his sense of identity was completely damaged after he became homeless, okay? And all the struggles he went through. So I'll see if I can find that video. It was a really good one that we can maybe watch. All right, guys. So I think I was only going to go through the first 4. Okay, there's one little question here. I do want to do more questions, so I've put this one in. I want you guys to look at this data. I know this is not the typical graph or kind of data that we look at. It's just more of an infographic, but it has got statistics there. And I want you to think about this question and write me an answer in the chat box. So the question is, if a person cannot meet the prerequisite of shelter, let's say because they're homeless, how might this affect their mental and physical dimensions of health and well-being? So you don't have to incorporate the statistics here, but just think about it as a normal kind of case study type question. And how might being homeless or not having proper shelter affect a person's mental health and well-being? So let's start with mental. What do you guys think? You can put it in the chat box. So what do we think? You can just link back to the keywords, all the keywords that we've talked about. Whenever we talk about mental health from unit 1 and 2 as well, think about those keywords, try to connect them to someone who's homeless and how they might, what they might be experiencing. Okay, let me start you guys off. I need some keywords, guys. Come on. We need more participation here, more involvement. So what could we say, guys? Not having adequate shelter or such as from being homeless. That doesn't make grammatical sense. Okay, fill in the gaps for me now, guys. What will we write here? Could affect mental health and well-being because, what could we say? What link can we make to mental health here? Yeah, good. Lower self-confidence and lower self-esteem. So we can write that down. You can say, yeah, and it could increase their stress and anxiety. Good. Excellent. Those are some good points there. Okay, so those are some of the things that you can talk about as well. You could even say that it could cause them to think in a negative way. I'm running out of space here. Maybe I'll pull this bit that way. Yeah. So you could say, you could even make them this is often something we see with people who are going through hardships, who don't have basic facilities or needs. They often they ask themselves, why me? Why does it always happen to me? Why is it that I don't have a house? Why is it that everyone else has one? So we start to think of our life in a more negative way. We don't see things, well, we don't look on the bright side. And that's actually a good point. You can link back to spiritual health and well-being, that someone who's homeless doesn't feel like they have hope in their future. They don't feel like there's anything to look forward to. Okay, and that affects the outlook that they have on their life, and that affects the kind of values that they have about life in general. Okay, so those are some really good points there. So we've got so many points. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 links in this answer to mental health and well-being. So I'll leave that on for a few seconds just for you to jot that down. Okay, while you guys are jotting that down, anyone who's already written an answer for mental health, can you give me an explanation or a description of how being homeless or how having a lack of shelter can affect your physical health and well-being? Thinking about all the examples that we've looked at for physical health and well-being in unit 1 and 2, because it's the same kind of examples we link back to in 3 and 4 as well. Think of the picture from the previous slide and think of the what's it called? Think of the picture from the previous slide and the guy sleeping on the bench who doesn't have a home. How might his physical health and well-being be affected? May not have adequate sleep and an adequate diet. Yeah, good. Because obviously when you don't, and where am I going to write this answer now? If I move this somewhere here and then I start a new answer here. Yes. Okay, so yeah, you can say that a person who lacks adequate shelter Notice that I keep using the word shelter, guys, because this is the key word, okay? Even though it's easier for us to say homeless, 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 shelter is the key word that we need to remember, okay? That's the key word in the memory tip as well. So just make sure you keep linking back to the word shelter. So a person who lacks adequate shelter may not have a proper place to sleep, which impacts their sleeping patterns and their physical health and well-being. So that's a perfect example there. Sleep can be connected to physical health and well-being. You can even say something like a person who lacks adequate shelter may not have proper kitchen facilities to cook. So the chances of them eating a nutritious and healthy diet will be quite low. Okay, they're more likely to depend on foods that are quick to buy and quick to eat, like you know, $2 cheeseburger from Macca's or something like that. They're not likely to be able to cook themselves a healthy home cooked nutritious meal. Okay, so really important to remember that. Okay, what else do we have here? Being homeless, lack of shelter is strongly correlated with inadequate, meaning that one doesn't have proper guidance, decreasing the adequate functioning. Yeah, that's a good link as well. So you can obviously link that back to the functioning of the body and its systems. I've run out of space. I'm going to fit that somewhere up here now. Okay, so you can also say, yeah, a person who lacks adequate shelter may not have proper health literacy. And we need to remember, guys, that when you don't have when you go to Centrelink or something, or when people apply for maybe payments from Centrelink, Centrelink won't give you anything unless you have an actual address. If you don't have an actual address, Centrelink can't help you, especially if you're asking for payments for low income or stuff like that, or you're applying for that. Centrelink can't help you if you don't have an address. So that's another really interesting point to think about as well, with connections to mental health and social health and well-being as well. Okay, so a person who lacks adequate shelter may not have proper health literacy as a result of not probably or perhaps not attending school or work due to their lack of stable home. This can lead to more problematic health behaviors such as drug use. Okay, we also need to remember that people who are homeless, we can't say that all homeless people are druggies. That's a very negative stereotype, but we can say that a lot of people who do fall into homelessness, they come from very difficult backgrounds. Either they're forced into homelessness because of poverty, or they are forced into it because of escaping domestic violence or those kinds of issues. So they already come from quite troubled contexts. And so they may turn to drug use, they may turn to alcohol, they may turn to smoking as a kind of escape from those kinds of problematic or troubled lives that they've lived, or troubled memories that they have. So that's another thing that is important to remember. And that obviously, if you are using drugs or smoking, this compromises the functioning of your body systems. Okay, that's another thing that we can think about as well. Okay, another thing that you can talk about for physical health, and I promise this is the last one, is you can also think about the fact that a person who lacks adequate shelter is likely to be physically attacked and may suffer physical scars or bruises as a result of this. And this is really one of the sad, really, really sad things about homelessness, is that there are a lot of heartless people out there that will get a kick out of bashing a homeless person, or out of, attacking a homeless person. A lot of females who have become homeless have been victims of sexual assault, physical assault, rape. So it's not easy being a homeless person, because there is the physical aspect of it as well, that you are not just vulnerable to the harsh climate, but you are vulnerable to the crazy people out there as well, who are ready to harm you and who don't understand who lack the empathy to understand the situation you're coming from. So that's another really interesting but sad point to think about as well, with reference to physical health and well-being. Okay, guys, so you got, I think, 4 different points for physical health there. So hopefully that should broaden your understanding of how adequate shelter, or lack of adequate shelter, I should say, can affect someone's physical health. Okay, Do we have any questions? Do you guys want me to go through any of the 4 factors again that we've just looked at, or are we kind of all clear? If you have any questions, by the way, just even if we end the class, just feel free to email me. I'm happy to give you more examples for you to understand one of the factors again, if you have to, if I have to, or if you need that extra explanation. All right, guys, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the recording here.